Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome for another interesting session of Coffee Chat with FiveS. I guess I've got Shanta with me. Hi, Shanta. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, hi, Kapil. Pleasure to be here. And thank you for this lovely opportunity. Always a pleasure.
Great. So let me quickly set the context for everyone's benefit. Shanta, Coffee Chat with FiveS has been kind of over 15 months old. We've got some phenomenal people joining in from across, I think, all over the continents, be it India, Asia, European, or the United States for that matter. So what we do is that we pick interesting subject and topics and then kind of conversation with experts like you and try and see if we can bring about certain change and awareness. Be topics are more from sustainability, future aspects when we are looking to build a more responsible businesses. So thank you so much for accepting the invite and kind of joining me for this month's coffee chat. Looking forward to have some great conversations with you.
Thank you, Kapil. Looking for a similar conversation and super excited to be here. And nice to see so many, no faces, but lots of people. So thank you, audience, for listening to me this evening. Thanks a lot.
Right. So Coffee Chat is, while conducted on Zoom, is also live on LinkedIn. So people on LinkedIn, will also be kind of watching us and listening to us. So let's get quickly started without wasting much of time. For the benefit of the audience, and I know very well the kind of, work that you do and you have done in past. I was in awe when, we spoke for the first time, and I know that while we started with 5-minute conversation, we ended up having 35 minutes of conversation, right? So why don't you give a quick background introduction? Where do you come from and what is exciting in your life right now that you're doing?
Thanks, Kapil. So lots of the fact that I'm still alive and kicking post-COVID, that's the first excitement that I'm living on. And every time there's a COVID news, it kind of awakens the fact that I'm still alive. And so that's the best exciting piece. But other than that, just to quickly tell you, I've done about more than 3 decades of being a banker. I worked with some of the biggest brands in this country, spanning from Grindlays Bank in the mid-90s to the late 90s, ICICI. Then I did American Express, moved home to Delhi, and then came back as a core transformational member with the then Ratnakar Bank and then RBL Bank. And after having done this treadmill for more than 3 decades, decided to step down and pay forward. And the intention was also to have, without any self-doubt, to go into areas which nobody else has treaded on. So one of the areas that I took up some 2 years ago, which was very interesting to me, was that I started my own chapter of Rotary Club, primarily to induct trans people. We talk about inclusion a lot, but we only do diversity. So my first experience was to start a Rotary Club, do a social entrepreneurship. And post my, I'm the first Rotarian ever in this country to have included trans people into all-inclusive club. And then post that, I raised some funds. I also invested partly as a loan, which was returnable, and opened the first trans cafe in Lokhandwala, Mada. The next thing that I'm doing is also upgrading trans people to get into the corporate life. I think it's very important to realize that there is enough and more happening in this space outside of trans, that is largely people with, specially abled people. I've also joined the board of a specially abled company, a specially abled trust, where we're building a school very close by in the outskirts of Bombay to primarily bring them into vocational training, etc. So that's something in the DEI space that I'm super excited about. In addition to that, I've joined a gender woman first organization as a senior advisor, primarily to look at women to occupy the table. And there's a lot of coaching, mentoring that's happening there. See, these are my diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. In addition to that, I've joined 2 boards. One is on a transformation journey and one is a fintech. So it's a pretty exciting journey to be on your own and with no brand name as a company, and you're walking the path as a woman called Shanta. So it's quite exciting when people like you reach out to me and without a chair. And so that's my exciting journey right now. And every day is a new day. I'm re-exploring myself. There's lots happening on the side. So that's the professional piece. On the personal side, I think there is a lot of excitement to be able to get up every morning and plan your day differently and not run exactly the way an organization decides you need to function. So I think these are a couple of good stuff that's happening in my life, Kapil.
Awesome. I think what you spoke about, very easily was like, just 3 decades of experience, right? So I think that's too humble of you. But why don't we do a quick deep dive into how you have seen the banking industry evolve in India? You have been, I think, for that matter, from the time it actually got institutionalized, you have been kind of part of it right from the so-called paper age to the digital age, right? You've been through the entire journey. So why don't you maybe spend some time talking about the entire banking industry's evolution in India, and how have you seen things changing drastically over all these years?
It's thanks for asking this question, Kapil. And, honestly, I'm quite jealous of the youngsters today. I wish I was 30 years younger. And, probably we are in the lucky stage of our lives right now as far as banking is concerned. I started my banking journey in the mid-90s. And in those days, if you were a salesperson with a foreign bank, you also did the collections if it went bad. So I think I started from there. And then I was lucky to join ICICI in the late 90s. And in the late 90s, most of the banks, if you look at banking per se, banking has gone through 3 phases. If you look at the 1700s to the early 1900s, to the late 1800s, you will find that banking was an early phase business. Then you had a second phase where nationalization of banks happened. I think I was fortunate in a way because after 1991, because the larger banks came in 1994, most of them came around 1994, 1995, Indian banks. I think I was lucky to have really got onto the bandwagon around that period of time. So I was also lucky to enter banking when banking was actually booming. Earlier, the lending was largely to industry, which was basically the large corporates. If you looked at the model of the mid-90s to late 90s. So when the real thing came was the retail industry, and that's the time I went into a bank like ICICI Bank, which became, the leader de facto. And I was lucky. Late 90s, retail happened. Housing happened in the early 2000s. Then there were credit cards business that happened, personal loans, unsecured funding, secured funding. Everything was this huge third-party DSA network, this expansion of the retail industry, expansion of consumerism. I think I was very, very lucky to have been part of that growth story. And that also gave us a lot of fillip to everyone's career when they took non-woman-oriented jobs. And I was fortunate because I did non-woman-oriented jobs in those early days of managing large teams, etc. So I think that worked well for me. And I'm using this non-woman thing, though I'm not a feminist, is primarily because there's a diversity, equity, inclusion conversation happening here. Subsequently, in the late 2008, after Lehman Brothers, I think there was a lot of intelligence that has been brought into portfolio management of a retail consumer. And then, of course, the latest era, which is actually, I like to call it the 4th phase, is this growing number of banks which are cutting across not just brick and mortar, but a lot of digital interventions, biometrics, facial recognition, machine learning, AI. I think banking has become like any other consumerism or any other consumer retail business. So having been in this journey for so many years and seen so many changing faces, I think one of the biggest challenges has been for people from our era who came from paper-based banking to becoming digital bankers, I think self-learning and study has probably made a big difference. If I have to look at becoming from corporate lending to retail lending to MSME, SME, microfinance, small finance banks, RRBs, credit societies. I mean, look at the number of things that are there to reach the last mile of a consumer. So just to quickly on my toes, I'm thinking and, answering you. So I'm just saying there's so much to talk, which is not enough for a 45-minute session.
Wow. So I think you have seen the entire, journey. While there were already, institutions in place, wherein there were, public sector banks also there largely. What do you think, one was the need of a new age banking, right? And what was the key differentiator that the entire modern banking, brought in, and what it continues to do even today, wherein while the new age banking came into picture, today we are talking about fintech, which is again further giving, run for money to the traditional banking channels, right? So what was the need? And then, how did this, or how does it really differentiate from an offering perspective and from a scale perspective to a larger use case, or, to a reach out to masses who are in tier 3, tier 4, or maybe rural areas?
So, okay, let me also tell you that in 2010, I joined RBL Bank. And I was part of the core transformation team. And this was a question that crossed my mind as well, because I was leaving American Express to join a startup bank, which was then called Ratnakar Bank, and also have the distinction of being the only woman who got recruited. I'm coming back to the diversity piece. And I was entering a space which was largely corporate bankers, and was run by very affluent, very good, high pedigreed people, and fortunately was part of that story. See, before I came in, one of the things that I'm talking as a very personal experience. I do not want to bring in the organizations at this point of time, Kapil. I hope you understand that I'm
I know
as an individual.
Absolutely.
So I had the same thought when I was moving from a Fortune 500 company to go and join Ratnakar Bank in 2010. And that too, it was post the 2008 fiasco of Lehman Brothers. And it was not the right time to really relook your professional challenges. But did take that move primarily because, microfinance had started. And again, there was this whole funding of self-help groups, joint liability groups. And, there was so much of interest in paying forward and seeing impact and sustainability. And here was a bank which had mushroomed from the interiors of Maharashtra.
Okay.
The footprint of part of Karnataka and part of Maharashtra. I'm taking this specific example because I can relate to it the best. And one of the reasons why I had that conversation to do this opportunity was primarily because if you look at money lending business, money lenders today do a lot of lending in smaller and smaller locations at very high rates of interest. Even though it was the same story at that point of time for microfinance companies, because we were lending at a much higher rate. So true financial inclusion happens the more interior you go. Having worked with large organizations, the footprint is largely to cater to urban poor and the urban rich. When you work and when you expand your footprint to the interiors of your country, you realize that you need such banks, because what is the banking footprint in banks in 2010? We're talking about 12, 13 years ago when there was no payments bank, there were no SFBs. At that point of time, to have a universal bank run by professionals to reach the last mile. Also recognize at that point of time, there were a lot of banks which were small in size. If I remember correctly, United Western Bank, etc., which were already acquired by the large fish. So there was an opportunity for one bank, which was a rural footprint bank, to really come up and say, I can make an impact, be a universal bank, look at consumers who probably have similar needs, and financial inclusion as the going in with the most desired pricing, so that you are actually not competing, you're actually competing with money lenders and microfinance companies. So I started with RBL as branch banking head. And that was the superb opportunity to go to the last mile. And I think that is the reason why in a milieu of banks, you still have a need. So let's take an example. You needed a passbook for a customer in the rural areas. In the modern footprint, of course, RBI came later and said we have to do it. And the regulator came in saying we have to give passbooks. But we started moving to statements and things like that, right? But there is this footprint, there is this model which continues. People still want paper-based interaction. They like to have a touch and feel. We already had a footprint. So I think there is a lot of need today for a customer, even in the rural areas. And therefore, these banks mushrooming digital interventions. Now, why do we need a fintech or a digital intervention? We created this BC footprint everywhere. Ultimately, there is an opportunity even there, right? To collect money on behalf of a bank. Most importantly, that every individual sitting in the remotest parts of this country wants to do a transaction which is at the ground level. He wants to pay his telephone bill. He wants to do a transfer to somebody who's sitting in some other part of the country, things like that. All of this is getting fueled by digitization. So I think the market is vast. Population has been stable, but realization of digital and made in India and all of that we are doing. Look at the penetration of UPI today. Look at the penetration of digital payments in this country. I was in the US recently. I don't think they can even touch us with the kind of digital payments we are doing today. And we talk about the Silicon Valley. Fact of the matter is that, there is so much happening here. Every small vendor knows how to do a transaction. I think this is the place to be, and there's so much of excitement here. And, women have become providers in SHG models. So how else could have they got access to banking and lending and, things like that? I think it's phenomenal, the growth story of the last 10, 12 years. And I'm glad I worked with a bank like Ratnakar, then RBL, because that penetration probably I wouldn't have learned in my urban rich exposure prior to that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think this then kind of brings to this is, you say that you were the only woman who entered, the institution. So when did this entire within an institution as big as banking institution? And, what do you think has been the journey from when it started to today? And, what is the way forward that you see in this entire piece of DEI? And do you really think that people still know what it really means? Sometimes your smile tells a lot, but still I would want to hear it from you.
So I lost you in between, Kapil, but I picked up a few threads. So I'm just going to go ahead. You can stop me if there's something which is not in sync with your question, because I lost you in between.
Let me just repeat quickly.
Yeah.
So essentially, when did this entire diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion start in banking industry? What has been the key journey from then till today? And where do you think we have reached, and where we basically would go with this journey without even attaching DEI with any business outcomes? Because what we are talking about is business with inclusion without talking about the taboos associated with it. So that's what I wanted to understand and know from you.
Like I keep saying that this is probably the right time to be born in this country, So when we started in the late 90s, late 80s, life was very tough, right? It was not the best times. We didn't have any Vishaka committee. We did not have any mandate to make sure that women were taken care of. So at least in my last stint where my early exposure to this woman angle came in ICICI. We had very powerful women leading from the front. And there was always this admiration to look up to those women. Okay. And I don't want to get into any controversial conversations of late, let me keep it to what I know, because that was a period which was the golden era where we looked at the women and said, fabulous. So I remember I was in a leadership program and where Mr. Kamath was presiding that leadership program. And I did ask this question. And at that point of time, Mr. Kamath made a very nice comment, and it stayed with me. He said in 1998, we were going through this whole process of reinventing ICICI. And when we were reinventing ICICI, we realized that we were just a financial institution lending large conglomerates. The industry was more about financing projects and things like that. It was called ICICI full form at that point of time. And they decided to move to a retail footprint. And there was a lot of discussion, and there was a little bit, whatever they had, the women stayed back. And many men did look for other opportunities at that point of time. And therefore, he felt that women do stay back because they basically have this ability to make, they don't get rocked by the rock of the boat very easily, or change in strategy. There's more retention. There's more solid staying there, things like that. And all of them had meteoric careers and rise and whatever else. Subsequently, when I actually left ICICI, which I definitely believe was a very pro-woman organization, highly meritorious when it came to, there was no woman thing, there was merit. When I joined RBL, it was early days, and we had attended one event in Kolhapur. And I'm not exaggerating, it was in an open garden. We were 1,000 men and we were 3 women there. And, I remember the 2 women were pretty much middle management in my team, in our bank's team, not in my team. And at some point, they said they wanted to go home. It was a customer event and there were a lot of customers. And I decided to stay back. And somewhere mentally, I decided that this is the time for me to create enough women in this organization. And honestly, and I was very well supported by the MD, the board. So I think a lot of influence from the top, if you're able to convince, plays a critical role on when does the agenda become important. It's about if you hire one woman and that woman is able to make a difference to the organization, you start believing in that concept. And I can very proudly tell you, we must have been less than 1%. By the time I walked out after 12 years, we were at 24% and growing. I also had a peer in the management committee who was also another woman, very well established, who's now leading a company as a CEO. So I think it is an agenda that women can carry if well supported by the board. The second big thing which I want to recognize is this corporate MCA guideline to have women on boards also helped push some of this agenda. The third, which I do not want to push under the carpet, is that I will not say this is specific to the organizations that I have worked for, but I would like to quote this, that when an investor, an international investor today puts money into your company, he does ask for your diversity quotient. Okay. And I think we still haven't walked the path too well on women first, that we will reach a stage where we still have to bring in other diversity candidates into the picture. Because I have moved on from just being women oriented to talk about trans and others as well. So I just want to tell you that there is an investor push. The last but not the least, your annual report to date was only talking about displaying gender. And you normally spoke about number of posh cases and blah, blah, blah. And that was good enough for annual reports. But there is a sustainability reporting on ESG today, which is an adjoiner to your annual report, which talks about impact, sustainability, and return on investment, which actually gives a very clear outline that, women are important because gender equality is one of the metrics in the ESG model. So this has become a boardroom conversation. Many BFSI organizations, because I am working with a company as a senior business advisor, and I can assure you that it is very, very rewarding to see both men and women take the lead on, gender-related mentoring, coaching. Of course, hiring is a no-brainer, but mentoring, coaching, training, leadership interventions, I've become a mentor to many senior women of other banks. And that's a pay forward impact and sustainability model for me. And that's what excites me personally. But I think many women listening on this call should be very happy that there is an investor push, there is a board push, there is a MCA push, there is a sustainability reporting push. So we have enough opportunities today. And notwithstanding the fact that women are good, the quality of women coming up and the kind of work they are doing, they've joined the army, they are flying planes, they are fighting wars. I mean, there is no place where they've been left behind. So I think it's a great world right now. It's about
absolutely. And I'm like, then I think this is also validation of the fact that just to share for people here that FiveS as an organization is the only diversity certified and owned BPM unit in South Asia, right? And in fact, on our board representation, there are more women than men. And it's not because for any other reason, but for the fact that they bring a lot more value on table than anybody else could. And more importantly, the human factor within an organization. I think while we are all on for business, but I think there is no way denying that if you need to bring sensitivity in people within an organization, and if we have a woman, and for that matter, any other diverse, person in the room, they can talk about a lot more issues than we can even imagine. Like, for example, if we are talking about people with different abilities, people with visual impairment, people with hearing impairment, what kind of systems, tools, processes, offices, infrastructure that you need to have, you have right available, everything in front of you. So I think this is something which is really good to hear from a perspective that now when MCA is talking about it, I hope that it just doesn't stay there and should actually grow. And also the fact that there should be more and more studies talking about how the entire work environment changes when there is diversity. Having said that, one of the things that has actually, that has struck me a lot is basically about the fact that right now, to me, diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually at the entrance point only, wherein everybody has started to talk about it, but it is just possibly at the superficial layer, wherein it is more about hiring. What are the key parameters according to you in day-to-day business operations that are important to realize the real benefits of DEI at core beyond hiring that the organizations or people should focus on?
I'll interestingly try to draw out on something else before I answer this question as clearly as cut and paste, Kapil. One of the things that I want to mention is that if you go to the rural areas, okay, there is no tom-tomming about diversity. Okay, so but let me tell you that even the self-help groups, there is always one deemed leader, and there are a bunch of women who actually drive it because many of their men do the ancillary jobs. Many of them are also consuming alcohol and are not the primary breadwinners for the family. So without tom-tomming the DEI strategy, there is a lot of work happening in the rural areas. A woman like Chetna Gala Sinha has created an enterprise called, Mandeshi. I've been to Maswad. Seeing is believing what illiterate women can do. Her CEO of her bank is a 10th pass lady. Her entire team are illiterate people, and she runs a bank. Now, what does that tell you when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion? That women, if given value, recognition, and limited opportunity, can make a success out of nothing. Okay, so that's what is my single biggest learning when I look at Chetna and her great work that she has done. She has created women docs. She has created women, she's somebody you should call. If you ask me, woman empowerment, true sense of the term, if I look up to somebody whom I really appreciate for the great work she's done, the impact she's done and the humility she's done, I would put her top of the charts. Now that is in the rural segment and, making an impact there. when we look at boardroom conversations on diversity, equity, inclusion, women are the easiest part of the to get in. I mean, there are enough studies because in 1960s, US adopted diversity. Okay, we are much later entrants, maybe 25 years later. But the fact of the matter is it's always a push when you want to bring women to the table. There is a push. So one of the things that, organizations need to focus on, which is why I'm associated with the organization which Anu has started, which is VAs, primarily because the interventions are to get mentors of a particular level who have seen it all to actually help women in middle and senior leaderships to succeed and get to the table. Ultimately, you don't ask how many men are on your table, right? You always ask how many women are on your table. Diversity works both ways.
Yeah.
It is not that you are any diverse. In fact, on a roadside, you will see caution men at work. You never see caution women at work. So even your boards read differently. But the realization that there are self-biases, that women can't do sales jobs, women can't network, women don't like sitting late, women get pregnant. Yes, unfortunately, God designed it that way. It came from Adam and Eve itself. So what the whole process that I'm trying to tell you, Kapil, is treat the woman as an equal and you will definitely get greater return on investment. Retention is higher. So how do you get these women who are already in the bandwagon to get on to the fact to say, I need this little push because there are 2 or 3 very smart women whom they perceive, and say, can we help them in this journey of mentoring, coaching, leadership? Are we there as a company? Are we there as a country? I think we have a long journey to go. So we are on diversity. We still haven't done equity and inclusion. But definitely we are on diversity. And I'm trying to make my little contribution on equity and inclusion. And I'm glad to see companies come forward to do that. And great partners like yourselves who bring us on the table to talk about great diversity work. So thank you, Kapil. Actually, congratulations to FiveS for giving this a space.
Oh, absolutely. I think some people actually put this as part of their CSR. For us, this is business, right? So I'm like, for us, the entire foundation of business is on diversity, equity, inclusion, impact sourcing, right? So I think we have a long way to go, but I'm sure that, once we start laying small foundation over time, a lot of people doing work, including you in this space, kind of, makes a lot of difference. Why don't you go on and talk about what is this Trans Cafe all about and how did this idea come about?
So it's a very interesting story. So, I sometimes, because I've been a corporate executive, I have to always be a little muted, because when I drag companies' names, it's unfair on that organization, those organizations where I've worked for, because all of them have been phenomenal. So one of the organizations that I worked in my early 2000s was hiring a trans person. Let me also tell you that, it was not a very evolved understanding of trans at that time. And I remember that then HR head, who was a very senior person of that bank, said, why don't you get this person interviewed by, I was not in HR. As you know, I've done business for 25 years. HR was about 7-8 years only. That was also because my MD of my last organization insisted that I get in there and do some change and transformation. But let me go back to history. And so the HR guy walked up with this girl, who was transitioning, and it came for an interview. And I was just asked to interview. And then while I was interviewing this person, one of the things that I asked that person straight off was, because that was a woman transitioning into a male. Now, as a woman, we all recognize that there are, she's a young woman. So there are certain things which you face, like menstruation, for instance, because you're still transitioning, right? So my question to her was, which toilet will you use when you are in your cycle? And she said that, and this guy from HR was stunned that I asked a question so straight, because the person was dressed as a male. I think it was an early impression. I was also very young at that point of time. So when I became the head of HR for my last assignment, I was very keen to hire a head of HR, a head of diversity, equity, and inclusion of a trans. So, in fact, I had on a Women's Day, I had called a trans woman to do a session with the entire team. And, that woman was not the most educated woman, but fortunately a movie is getting made on her now. But she had some adversities that was very impressive for me. So my question to her was that, why don't you give me somebody like you, but educated? Because ultimately, it's an organization, right? You need to know English and you need to navigate, and you're doing diversity, equity, inclusion. And I thought nobody could be better than a trans person to do diversity, equity, inclusion. For a transitioning bank, a transforming bank, it would have been tough for inclusion. We were very good at our diversity numbers. We were inclusive of women first. But there's always a challenge when you want to get in a trans person. But I kept myself engaged with the trans person. And that lady moved on to join KPMG as a DEI head, and then went on now also as a DEI head of a multinational company. So then when I started my own Rotary Club, primarily to start learning about trans. And when I look at trans people, and I have been connected with corporates, tons of HR heads. And whenever I try to talk about placing a trans in a corporate life, I think I do see challenges. There is a mind acceptance to include trans. So one area which got very exciting to me was, these trans people all of them go into sex work as part of their growth story. Could be a successful trans woman, not so successful trans as well. And I learned a lot about the fact that before 1851, trans people were advisors to the emperors. It was only during the British Raj that they got ostracized. And why? And when I think back and think why they were so smart, is that core is that, they are males and they've seen more adversity before they transition to becoming females. Of course, we have both sides, okay? There are men who also transit, women who become men as well. That percentage is much lesser. But one area that was a little disturbing for me was the sex work. So I pulled out about 10 sex workers and joined this woman to start this trans cafe. So basically they are sex workers who have been trained, because I cannot give them corporate jobs as they are not educated. But simultaneously, I'm happy to tell you that I've been able to place a few trans people in corporates. And I'm extremely happy to say that we do not have a hiring company today who does this as a focus area. But as an individual, I'm using my networks to pay forward. Although there is a lot of selling, it's almost using all my business selling tactics to make the impossible possible. So I've got the Trans Cafe up and running. It's early days. We started on the 6th of October. It's the first quarter. But I'm so happy to see the glee on 10 people who work at the cafe. I think, and the next one is going to be a beauty salon. Beauty salon is far easier because if you know that many trans people do work in the beauty salon as well. So for me, this is more a pay forward. I think as a woman, I do not want to be seen as subjugated in any which way. And as a woman, I feel very privileged when I meet the trans people. Their lives are far tougher than mine. So that's probably the reason to do this, Kapil.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, just to share with you, we, actually spoke to Shreya.
Yes.
And we got her to, talk to the entire team at FiveS for one of the sessions.
Thank you.
It was phenomenal. And I'm like, people just couldn't stop, enjoying that entire session. And also the fact that, you would want to have, somebody like her or them in the system so that they can be as open as anybody could be, right? So I think it was a great eye-opening session as well. And what we are doing is basically, even at FiveS, we are trying to use it as a sensitization mechanism so that as we, open up and scale towards, inclusion and actually diversity, taking the core piece in our Navi Mumbai center that we had set up and kind of able to talk to a lot of businesses that this really works, right? So I think it's just phenomenal. Now, you spoke about what do you have right now at hand. Basically, most of the trans women, or for that matter, trans men, everybody is largely into, say, for example, sex business, or they are a sex worker in a way or other, but they want to have a better living, right? This is what they have today. And this is an outcome of the fact that they did not have any one education, support, two, the fact that they did not have any other job that they could possibly, hop on to. So from a longevity perspective, in terms of, say, for example, if we talk about 10 years down the line, and if we have to change the entire way, trans communities is perceived or seen, we need to do a lot of work in hindsight to focus on their education, right? Now, do you see anything which is happening in that space? Because if they are educated, then they would be ready for job consumption, and that's where we would possibly be able to bring more and more people in mainstream. Or you feel that it could always be a transition that would continue to happen?
See, I think we as a country haven't reached freedom of thought. What we have reached is freedom. I don't think it's education. I think it's acceptance. So if you personally ask me, there are enough qualified trans people. The reason I have taken the path of sustainable livelihoods for them is primarily because the people who are non-trans, which is all of us, our ability to have freedom of thought, to accept that this person is also like us. The reason why we do not accept even the qualified ones into the fraternity is because our freedom of thought is limited. So it's not that we don't have educated people. You have doctors, you have politicians, you have enough and more people who are, let me take Shreya as an example. Although my partner is a far more evolved trans woman, I'm also working with another trans woman who is working on HIV awareness. She has set up many clinics and works with Johns Hopkins. I was fortunate to have in my trans cafe, the other day I met some doctors who had flown down, all women, young women, who have come down from the US, and they were spending time with me to understand the trans space. The biggest thing that I see is that it is freedom of thought. The moment you accept that they are just like me, in fact, even better. Okay, even better, because one of the things you need to realize is that as a woman, I can jolly well tell you, women do shed a tear more often than a trans does. I think it's about making your mind strong enough to say, I am okay with a personality. When you look at a specially able person, that person is also different from me. If I look at a badly dressed person, that person is also different from me. But we have freedom of thought to accept all these people. But when it comes to trans, we don't have freedom of thought. The day we have freedom of thought, the system will employ irrespective. Today, let me tell you that there are companies which take people who are 10th pass, 12th pass. They do vocational guidance, etc., etc. And what do you think about specially able people? To get a specially able person into an organization, you have to change the infrastructure. You have to change the way you do business, because there are certain softwares that have to be implemented depending on the kind of disability. You also can't give them extended hours of work because they can't be sitting in one place for too long. Certain jobs you can't do. But when it comes to the trans, what is different with them? It's gender expression. Why are we so closed as people to take a gender expression? I think it is freedom of thought. It's not education. It's not all about, and also please recognize, family as a unit is the first outlier for them. And therefore, they get educated by the gurus they follow. So at the end of the day, there is a gurukul. So if you ask me, is CSR, can they hive off a little bit of money for trans, educate them, get them vocationally savvy and make sure they get placed? Maybe that's a great opportunity which you are touching upon as a thought provoker. But personally, if you ask me, if I had somebody coming for an interview and I ignore the fact how the person looks, and only focus on the core capabilities of that person, I think we should hire them. So Shreya was a classic example. I exposed Shreya to FiveS. And, and I've exposed her to 3 other organizations, and one of them has picked her up. So that is the level that people, it's a freedom of expression and freedom of thought.
Absolutely. I think we have to travel a long journey, and which is ahead of us. And at the end of the day, what people need to think is what kind of processes, what kind of beliefs that you would have in your thought processes or policies, for that matter, that would kind of enable real inclusion, irrespective of whether it is trans, people with disability or different abilities, or women for that matter. And then it's not just about getting them into the system, but also about how you can create the growth path for them to grow to the next level and evolve as human being and evolve as professionals, for that matter, right? And I think there's a lot to do, and basically a lot of distance to travel as we talk about humanitarian aspects, right? So, but I'm glad that at least now we see ESG in each of the reports, business reports, DEI coming into the fore, and the measurements have started to happen, right? So if you are measuring, then obviously the next step is how do you improve? But glad that at least the measurement has happened. The pace needs to be faster. Now, I think, it's been almost about 50 minutes that we have been talking. So we didn't realize, right? So maybe...
thank the audience who are still listening.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure that we have forcefully put them on mute, otherwise they all will be talking, right? So otherwise they'll ask questions. So maybe let's move on to the last part of coffee chat. Maybe we'll try and take one question. And this is something that I've seen a lot when I go and talk to even my customers, for that matter. And if I talk to them about, would this data make any difference to you? When I, like, for example, from one of my customer, I've been sending them every month the diversity ratio that we maintain for their program. Okay. Do you think that businesses have really started to value it? I'm like, tomorrow, if I go and pitch to, say, for a banking or insurance major and say that, hey, you know what, we want to run a program which would include, people from all walks of life, and we would want to run a experience center for you and see how do you see the difference from a business operations do you run, and then operations that you run from people who are from all walks of life. Do you think that there is openness in businesses to consider as mainstream, or they still would consider this under CSR only?
No, not at all. I mean, even our own bank, we had an all-woman branch. Okay. And, Vodafone started it ages ago. They had that pink as their color and, did all of that. I don't think we are far behind. It's just about adoption of the fact that you can do this and try it out. I'm not a strong believer in one diverse community. See, for me, diversity is having men at work as much as women at work.
Absolutely.
I don't want to make this a thing of, that's too much of feminism. And I'm not a huge advocate of that. Let me tell you, all my life, I had a male secretary. I think it's very important that when you create anything, you create it as if people are equals. Ultimately, it's all about equity. It's not just about inclusion.
Yeah.
And check out where, when you want to put a dashboard out in terms of percentages, if there was a branch, let's take a bank branch, the number of women superseded or were equal to the men and were doing roles which there are biases. Women can't do sales. Women can do only operations. Women can do only support roles. Women can do only HR. Women can do only within HR, not talent act. You can only do it over the phone. There are so many preset biases. If we as human beings get freedom of thought to say, give that woman a chance when you want to give her a leadership opportunity. I think what I'm very proud of is all my bosses, especially my male bosses, gave me those opportunities. And I am so thankful to all of them because of them, today I can stand tall and say, I've done sales, I started my career selling microwave ovens door to door. Somebody realized my potential and gave me a bigger role and a bigger role and a bigger role. Eventually to become a CXO of a bank and to exit at my terms. I think I'm very, very thankful to the men at work. Do I strongly believe that it would have been different with a woman? I don't know. It's always the men who asked, and I've never had a CV which floated in the market for a job. So these were the men who also identified me to join them. So I must give full credit that it is an equal society. Absolutely. It's just freedom of thought and expression. We wake up, diversity, equity, inclusion is going to happen. I think it's all about awakening and realizing that the opposite sex is important. So, you know, we all have to recognize it. And let's just move. Yeah, I mean, it's not so complicated.
Oh, absolutely. I'm like, you made it look so easy, right? But I think people will still have to, you know, overcome that taboo. And in fact, I've got a lot of people who have texted me as well as we speak. And, you know, they said that, hey, you know what, I would want to, you know, have certain questions, but I cannot ask here. And, you know, I would
ask them to ask me privately.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do a mentoring session.
Absolutely.
So we started a program called Allyship.
Okay.
You know, male gender sensitization.
Wow.
Happy to get any company. This is fortunately by the company which Anu runs, which is BFSI. Okay. But it's allyship, you know, it's interesting. And I'm happy to tell you that I'm very happy to connect with your team, Srinivas and all, very pro women and, you know, very diverse in their thinking. I think it's phenomenal when you carry such teams. So congratulations to you for leading from the front.
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, I feel that, you know, there are people like you and many others who have done some tremendous work in this space already, that people are now starting to adopt, you know, equity as the way forward, right? And I'm sure that with time it would come to fore. But I think overall, it looks like there's a lot which has happened and there's a lot which still needs to be done. And with people trying to put some serious efforts around it, I'm sure that by the time we cross 2030, it would be mainstream and there would be no biases for that matter in terms of what kind of role can be done by who, right? I think that aspect of diversity and inclusion should have happened by then. And as an organization and as people like you, I think we are doing our bits and we just need to scale. So we would continue to do that. And I'm sure that I'm going to catch hold of you in Mumbai when I'm there next time and possibly go and talk to some of the banks and see if they are ready to pick something like this as a BAU stuff. Because so far what I heard was, you know, there's still a taboo wherein they say that, okay, I can pass you on to my HR and they can possibly run a CA. Right. So I think that's something which is extremely important for us to, you know, communicate. And I would be shameless reaching out to you and maybe talking to a few leaders and see what we can do to kind of have more equity and inclusion at work. So with that, I would like to thank you for giving time and, you know, talking about one, the banking evolution, two, you know, how you are open in terms. It's not just about feminine, it's also about the fact that we are talking about being equal and respectful towards the opposite sex and gender, and to have diversity in real mean. And I remember from our first conversation that it's not just about bringing people in, but also giving them equal chances and then also having them on the table to speak. So, you know, we are on a journey and I'm sure that we would travel that, you know, together with similar thoughts. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kapil, and thank you to the entire audience, and thank you to FiveS Digital, without whom this would not have been possible. I truly appreciate this interaction.
Looking forward to see you in person. Take care. Have a good one.
Look forward to the real coffee.
Absolutely.
Take care and thank you.
Take care.
And anybody who has questions, please write into me on my inbox on LinkedIn. Happy to answer, and I'm always happy to connect on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. And we'll see you next month. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.